Thank you for joining me tonight on tonight's LinkedIn Live with Danny Villarreal from Jungle Scout. I'm not going to do too much of an intro because I'm going to let Danny do quite a bit of talking tonight so I can absolutely focus on getting you that real fruitful juice and information. So let me start by asking, Danny, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Sure. My name is Danny Villarreal. I am the head of customer success at Jungle Scout. I've been working here for about 3 years. So from the time we were a much smaller startup to now we've grown quite a bit in that time. And my main focus right now is working with our customers, leading our customer success teams and effort. And also thinking a lot about product-led growth, just, in that I'm in a unique position working directly for the chief product officer in our company.
Nice. So talk to me about Jungle Scout. What do you guys do and how does Jungle Scout fit into the market?
It's a great question. Jungle Scout is a leading e-commerce market intelligence tool. And what that means is that we work with everyone from entrepreneurs to small to medium-sized businesses, large brands, agencies, and investors to help bring them intelligence about e-commerce, everything from trends, search, all of the things that really help them focus on their businesses and grow those businesses over time. We're really focused on that data and being very data-driven, both internally and externally.
Okay, cool. So thanks for the introduction. Thanks for framing who you are, where you come from. That's brilliant. The one question that I'm dying to ask you, right, and I love this one, is tell me about product-led growth and where did it all start with you?
Sure. When I first started in this role, I had no idea what product-led growth is, to be honest. And someone actually gave me a copy of Wes Bush's book, Product-Led Growth. And at that time, I had just been recruited into Jungle Scout. And they had asked me, to help build some teams from the ground up and to really focus on our customers. And it was interesting because as I was consuming some of that content, reading the book, reading some of the blogs, starting to attend some of the different, webinars and things that were going on, I was immediately able to apply some of the principles or just some of the things that I heard people talking about to some of the things that we were doing. And a lot of those maybe initial efforts were focused on, really simple things like how do we make our onboarding flows better? How do we get our customers to adopt? What can we do about some of the main friction points in our product? And it just got me thinking, like, I'm doing a lot of these things in the real world. I'm reading about a lot of this more of a, from a best practice perspective, like maybe we should try to do some of this for real and try to apply the theory in practice.
Okay. And what challenges did you face on that journey?
Lots and lots of challenges along the way. I think, anybody that tells you that, changing your strategy or, even applying things that you might be reading about or that you might feel very well educated about. I think the first thing is just getting buy-in, right? Like if you show up at your company tomorrow and start talking about product-led growth to everybody or handing out books and, people are going to wonder, okay, well, what is this? What's in it for me? And so I think, as an advocate for this, within the business, you have to very clearly be able to give that elevator pitch of, why does it matter to me, to my function? How does it make my job or my life easier? How does it benefit our customers or the bottom line of the business? And that's a lot to start with, right? And so, the response back to me specifically was, well, show me, like, don't tell me, show me the value of this or prove it to me in data so that I can wrap my hands around this so I can start to do it.
So let me jump in there, right? So you're saying that you kind of go in, you say, look, I want to do this. I've read this great book. It sounds amazing. We want to get on with it. And someone says, show me. Surely that means quite a lot more than data, right? There's got to be some cash involved. There's got to be some time involved, some engineers. Like, how does that sort of conversation escalate?
100%. And I think what it took initially was for me to understand, like, what were some of the biggest problems that at that time the business was trying to solve for, right? So how could I take product-led growth as a methodology and apply it to something that was really specific that I was being asked to focus on, so I could say, here's the value in a real world experience, and I can prove to you in data, in numbers, the kind of impact it had. So our first sort of shot at this was making a bet around some product-led onboarding specifically. Because that was, again, when I very first started here, that was the core function that I was leading. And there was a lot of low-hanging fruit. So the opportunity was pretty big, both to the business and to be able to make a meaningful impact with our customers. And so that first step, it doesn't sound super impactful when maybe you say it, but the results were what was impactful. And, at the time we had just a lot of customers. Like Jungle Scout has, 500,000 customers at that time. We were just inundated with, support requests of all sorts. So that was a big problem. Like, how do we reduce the touch from the customers to always need to ask for help for everything? Like, how can we help our customers help themselves? And so one of the first projects that we did was, how do we bring help into the flow of work? How do we make the onboarding more intuitive so that a lot of the questions that we get, which were around, hey, how do I get started with this? How do I get to that first aha moment, or, get to that first piece of value? And so it sounds, like I said, not maybe as such a sexy first project, but we brought help into the app. We made it better. We made it more clear, more accessible. And instantly we saw just massive results from that.
Okay, so I'm just going to rewind this back a bit, because, the 3-year journey means that hopefully we can dive into a little bit of what was going on when you're back in 2018 now. You said there was like a lot of low-hanging fruit in that onboarding process that you thought would be quick wins, right? Can you give us a little bit more flesh around what that was and how you had identified that, and potentially what was being tracked already to make that apparent?
100%. Jungle Scout grew very quickly from its inception to where I came in to the company. So they were in a period of massive growth from a customer perspective. And I think, we had a great tool set, a great platform, but no one had really ever thought about, what if we have more segments of customers? Like, what if we have people that maybe don't know as much about the industry, or don't know as much about Amazon, or, a lot of the dynamics that they needed to get started. So how could we bridge some of those gaps? How could we provide some of that information? How could we give them something as simple as like a getting started guide, or here's the very first thing that you should do when you start using our tool, right? Nice. And so these are the kinds of things, and whether it was like a getting started checklist, or, making help more accessible to people, so some very light, getting started content like onboarding video, or, just embedding that right into the app. And we had just also implemented Pendo around that time. So we were able to track and measure, what were people doing before? So we had a baseline of, how sticky was the product? How often were people using it? How often were people, clicking off to go ask for support and doing other things? Yeah. So that really facilitated both that before and after view. And it also helped identify maybe where some of the biggest friction points in the product were. That led us to start, questioning, were people really able to get to that first aha moment as quickly as maybe we thought they were doing it?
Okay. And so, first things that springs to mind when you say help, right? I'm thinking like wizards, knowledge base, that type of thing. Is that what it is?
Yeah, it was as simple as bringing the knowledge base from an external site. So, if I ran into a problem in the product, I didn't know how to do it or use that part of the tool, I had to leave the site, go to some Zendesk portal, look up the article. Then if I still couldn't figure it out, I had to write into support, right? So what we did is we brought that into the app itself. So a little widget that you could click on that would allow you to search our knowledge base, would even allow you to submit a ticket directly from there. And it also allowed us to deflect tickets by suggesting answers to their questions before they even submitted it, right? So there was a little bit of technology involved there, but I think a lot of it was just really understanding the customer better. And some of this also came in through customer interviews at the time, right? Like, so we didn't do any of this blind. We didn't make any assumptions. We said, we think we know what we're going to do, but we want to validate that. So we started with the product team, and then we went to some of the users directly and said, tell us what your first time in the tool was like. Show us your experience. We even did use some, at that time, light recordings through tools like Hotjar, just to see, like, hey, show me the first time someone logs into our product and what that experience looks like for them. And it was eye-opening, right? We saw people just getting stuck or doing things in a way that maybe wasn't intuitive. So it gave us a lot of ideas, but also just getting that feedback directly from the customer helped balance some of the more objective data that we have with some subjective data.
So does that become addictive?
I'm a huge data nerd, so I mean, I think that's the problem with, I'm very enamored in understanding things, and I'm very curious by nature. And so I think one of the problems is once you do start pulling the covers back and really digging in and shining the light in the dark places, like, do you know where to stop, right? Do you know when you've got enough information? And so I think you do have to create some limits for yourself, because the desire to maybe put your arms around all things or solve everything at once is very strong, because you see the opportunity. But I think a lack of focus, a lack of discipline, a lack of rigor, putting really tight timeframes on projects that you're running can actually be detrimental to getting buy-in longer term. And that was, I know you asked what were some of the roadblocks. Like, that was a roadblock. We were very ambitious in the beginning about what we could accomplish. And so we tended to lean into things that were bigger or maybe not as well defined in terms of like success criteria or, the impact. So those were some of the things where I think maybe we lost some traction early on. But it's important to acknowledge, failing is how you learn. And if you can fail quickly, and if you can learn very quickly from those mistakes that you made, it's actually multiplies your success in the future. So, you can't be afraid to fail, but you also have to have a time limit in which it's okay to fail too, right?
Okay, that all makes sense, right? But so just to kind of recap, you've killed off you've solved all the low-hanging fruit, you've plucked it, it's done. You're now starting to look at like bigger and better opportunities. And you've just said that maybe the way you guys approached it, the way you were trying to sell it back internally, was that a problem? Or was it just like the scale of what you thought you could approach? Like, what was it? Or was it a balance of two?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both, right? I mean, when you're dealing with just a massive customer base, to think that if you can even just solve some of the bigger, the biggest low-hanging fruit that's out there, things that do really make a difference. And just as an example, like in that help project, and in bringing some of those like getting started checklists and very light onboarding to bear, we were able to drop the support tickets down in half in a period of 3 months, right? So that was like a major accomplishment where you could see the value to the business, to the customers, the reduction in that friction. But the problem is then, there's that high expectation now, right? There's also the ability to, continue in a sustained fashion to make improvements. Like, I'm a huge fan of continuous improvement, but a lot of times people want to see like much bigger results. So I think, when you're talking to leadership about what can we accomplish or what are the big rocks, some of those things might be on much larger horizons, and it's up to you as someone leading these efforts to break them down into the atomic parts, right? To say, this is a very large thing that we want to be able to do. That's maybe an entire year, but that's probably like 10 different projects of very incremental things that help us get there. And so, you can't just turn the ship instantly every time. And often it takes a lot of socialization of your ideas, getting buy-in from different departments, product managers, leaders in marketing, leaders in other departments, in finance or sales, especially if you're doing things that have any question of impacting revenue, right?
And I just want to jump in there, right? Because tiger teams, right? I'm just going to kind of do a tiger team. You just mentioned teams, you mentioned buy-in. I know it kind of is jumping back again, but how did you guys go around putting that first like tiger team together?
Yeah, I mean, luckily I was able to assemble a cross-departmental team to form this new team that I was building. So they were bringing with them from different departments, like from support, from marketing, from different departments, like their own subject matter expertise, their experience. So what that helped us do is like I wasn't starting from step zero. In some ways, like my personal view of things as a brand new person to the company was extremely valuable. I'd come from a different business. I'd come from a different industry. I had different, just what I was bringing to the table was a unique perspective. But I also needed to be able to lean on people that really did understand the current state of the business. And I think a lot of times, if you don't have that, it's very difficult to map like where you want to go if you don't know where you are. And so a lot of it was us using that team and leaning on those people to get a really solid understanding of like, where are we right now? Where do we want to be in the future? And how do we start to map that? And a lot of that was being diplomatic about that, taking this to other teams, hearing their ideas. Because I think if you just start to drive off in one direction and you don't have that support and you haven't established any sort of, experience, authority, results, whatever it is, I think you're going to find it's going to be a very lonely and difficult journey along the way.
Definitely. And I just kind of hearing about those cultural challenges there and how that could change. I mean, the book, do you know it, Radical Candor by Kim Scott?
Yes, absolutely.
So do you take some of that and apply that to the culture that you now need to create?
I think there's got to be, right? And I love the term radical candor. I think it's almost sometimes too fancy to say, look, we need to have real talk. We need to be able to speak honestly about things, because I think there's this just overarching attitude of like, if you're saying things that may cast negative light on the business, that you don't believe in it, or that you're not an advocate for making it better. And I think like real radical candor comes in that ability to acknowledge things aren't perfect. There's lots of room for improvement. There are so many opportunities just when you look around you, whether it's a product thing or a team thing or a process thing or how you're interacting with your customers. And I think that the day that you stop, you say, oh, we're at a good place. You've lost your passion. You don't care anymore. You're not showing up. And I think, you shouldn't like overthink things, but I think to the same point, like constantly challenge your assumptions that we can do better, that there's always room for additional opportunity to grow the business or to do things more efficiently, more effectively, anything like that.
Okay, so let's stay there. So if we look at that in terms of like your sprints of work that you were doing, if you like you do your learning, you do your assessment, you optimize that. Do you then move on to the next thing? Because this first thing, you could always do something more. So do you have to say, right, there's a box we need to put this in for the time being?
I think so. And this is where just sort of setting good expectations comes into play, right? Being really clear about what your definition of success. I've always had a hard time with like time boxing things because I'm very ambitious about like what I want to be able to achieve. But I think you actually can give yourself like more points in terms of the people that you're trying to gain that critical mass from, right? And especially internally, if I can say like, I have 60 days that I'm going to work on this, this is what we hope to achieve, but even this at like 75% is going to be success. And so you're setting sort of expectations of here's where we think that we can get. If we are really able to hustle and get a lot of velocity, maybe we can get to here. I think sometimes the mistake with sprints is that you'll say, oh, we'll come back to that later. And you just never do. So I think like, don't be too Pollyannish about we're going to make everything perfect. And also don't discount, like sometimes it is worth putting in that extra week of time. Sometimes it is asking for some additional resources if you really think it's going to pay off more. But I think it's on you as the person that's leading this or the person that's advocating for this to be able to quantify what good looks like, to be able to demonstrate those results, and to then be able to communicate that back to everybody else at the end of that process, as well as incrementally throughout, what you're doing.
Okay, so product-led by its very meaning means opening up the product at the top of the funnel, right? Which is broader, it's wider, and it comes with a lot of added weight, right?
Mhm.
One of the first things that happens typically when you open up the top of the funnel, the products at the top of the funnel, is like an influx of people. Now, you guys sound like you were pretty well funded, or you were doing well anyway, right? So maybe
Mhm.
cash wasn't a problem, but I'm kind of just bouncing between listeners and what your experience is, and thinking to myself, if onboarding is like the crux of this, right? And then the experience, it's onboarding and then the following experience. That's the key part of this. How do you manage those challenges, right? Firstly, let me break this down into one part of the question. How do you strip back your onboarding? If someone's listening today, it's like, what process should I follow to strip back my onboarding to start the work there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually an amazing question. One of the first things that you have to do is understand, and I'll maybe take a step back from that because it leads to the answer, but really understand, like, what is the value proposition for your product? If you can't articulate that very clearly in one or two sentences, then you've got a lot more work to do, right? And so I think for us, the company had grown very quickly. So was our value statement to customers, was our job to be done that we could solve for them, was that known? Was it very clearly articulated? Did they know why they were coming in? Was our marketing aligned with that? So I think you have to kind of start with that being the seed for everything that grows from it. Really clearly understanding the value prop of your product, understanding the expectations that you're setting through marketing, through anything else that you're communicating, even your onboarding. And then, is there any gap between what you're saying and what customers are experiencing, right? Because it's that value gap that starts to emerge that is the reason people don't adopt. It's the reason that people churn. It's the reason that long-term retention starts to suffer. And so a lot of our onboarding was very clearly articulating and reinforcing the value proposition of, hey, we know why you bought this product. This is what the most successful people who are using our product are doing. And this is sort of the happy path that we're laying out for you in terms of like what getting started, what getting you to value, what getting you to that first, like, I feel like my money's been well spent, right? Like you want to have that sort of feeling. And so that was what we designed our initial experience around, that people felt clear on expectations, that we were able to direct them to those experiences, and that we were able to support them in any friction points that they felt along the way. And even better, that they could support themselves too, that they didn't need us, but that we were here as sort of that secondary, safety net for them.
So you mentioned earlier on the, keeping marketing aligned. Now, for early stage companies that may decide to pivot, it might not be as kind of impactful, but what challenges do you see when your marketing communications have been like, this is what we do, and then all of a sudden you go, we're going this way, and we've got buy-in, and now your whole communication strategy needs to change to support this? What challenges do you see there?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, a lot of this comes down to communication, right? In the best of all worlds, like I would be communicating with the leaders on those teams. I would be working with product marketing. I would have a really good understanding on the reason for that pivot, and maybe even involved in some of the messaging myself that helps me understand like why they want to do that, what we would need to change in our onboarding. So, look, I think a lot of this is about being agile in your own processes. Like, I'm not going to create something once and pretend it's going to be the forever solution, right? And I think a lot of teams don't build in that ability to pivot. And so often you get stuck with mixed messaging, which is like how things get disconnected in the first place, right? So the first part is communication between the teams, making sure they're a part of those initiatives and understand what's being driven and how impactful that can be to maintaining and retaining those customers over time. But also making sure that you have adequate time, budget, resources to be able to revamp things and to think of something like marketing's changing their messaging. That means this needs to change this, so it's all part of like one giant program. So you're not losing that, but it's going to be hard. And like, when I joined Jungle Scout, we're a 40-person company. So, I was definitely doing a lot of the work myself, or, helping people do it. I also think there's like a certain amount of dog fooding that needs to take place with any product, right? The people who are marketing it should be trying to use it, should be, understanding where they're coming from. And I think that always creates a much more informed perspective about some of these things. And we're very fortunate that some of the people on our marketing team, even our chief marketing officer, uses our tool in a real way, like uses it for a side business that they've got, or uses it for a volunteer type thing that they're working on, right? So there are some really cool applications. And so I would always urge people, like, knowing the product, being able to walk a mile in your customer's shoes is really paramount to almost anything else. And it creates that lasting alignment that drives that future success, both internally and externally.
Cool. I mean, that is a very good answer to the question. Now, I'm trying to kind of allow you to tell your story, and I keep jumping in, and I'm going to kind of
you're totally quiet.
But you guys had something going on in Asia, right? And PLG was a massive impact to your success there. Can you tell us what you can tell us about that and the whole PLG process?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we learned as the company was growing was that increasingly our product was becoming a global product, meaning even though we may not have been actively marketing in Europe or South America or Asia, people were using it there, right? And we weren't localized. We didn't have help content in other languages. I mean, we didn't have teams over there, right? And so, we took an initial stab at, again, just a hypothesis, a bet to say, if we start to localize some of the same content that we built for onboarding, for training, for help, that we can make that more self-sufficient for those customers, that we can keep more of those customers longer term, and that maybe we can find an opportunity to expand our businesses in those markets. And so it was very much like a big question mark. Like, there was no assumptions that any of this was going to work. And we started with just some, translations and some, subtitling or captioning of videos and things like that. And it wasn't perfect, like far from perfect. It was very scrappy, very just, let's just see if this has any legs. And right away, what we started to see was increase in usage from some of those user populations. In fact, we saw some of those markets, and the Asian markets being one of those, really respond positively to that. And the immediate, answer was, hey, let's start hiring some people that are going to be responsible for, like, putting more focus on what could potentially be a growth market for us, another way. And I learned, I mean, there could probably be a whole other webinar on just like what I learned from, working with international markets. But I would say that the Chinese market itself was just vastly different culturally, from an expectation perspective. Like, they expected much more hands-on training. Like, they love self-help, but they wanted to talk to you in a WeChat group, and they wanted in-person training, which we hadn't offered up to that point, right? So there was a much higher touch, but from a reward perspective, we were able to get a lot more velocity and very, very quickly grow a business from a ground up there. And within a year, we opened an office, and now we've got multiple offices in Asia that we're operating out of. And I would say, this was maybe the spark that lit some of that. I think there were a lot of other efforts going on, so this wasn't just a singular point. But I think it helped validate some assumptions or dig into an area that no one was actively digging into at that time, right? It was just another data point in a chart. And so we were able to bring maybe a new light to some of that, and maybe spark some interest and get the business thinking about some of the potential that exists there.
So I just want to jump in on something, right? Because if I'm a founder, and you're working around and you pick up how they start to think, right? And they're like, perception, I have got to be perfect. And all of a sudden there's you're like, oh, well, we put some videos together. We've got some subtitles going on. It was a little bit scrappy, but we just figured that we'll try it and see where we go. How do you take ego out of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's lucky for us, like, our founder was very hands-on in the business, is still very hands-on in the business. Like, he used to make onboarding videos for me at the beginning. There was when I first pitched us building our academy, he said, great, get me 100 videos that you want to make, and I'm going to lock myself in the office over the weekend and just knock them all out. And I was like,
oh, wow.
I love your enthusiasm, but we need more planning. I think that spoke to his personal investment in some of this, and that he really believed in what we were doing. And that wasn't like overnight. I think that was an accretion of winning and of getting velocity. But the fact that he was willing to dedicate his own time to it, I think it spoke just volumes to, how much he was willing to personally invest. And that sort of was a good example to the rest of the company. Like, he was leading of like how he expected. And, one of our values is to be scrappy. And so I think having value alignment, one of our other values is test and iterate, err on the side of a decision. So I think all of those, some of our just core values help allow us to be more inquisitive, to try things, to be more entrepreneurial, which is another one of our core values. Like, these are things that allowed us to say, hey, my job is just this, but I see this opportunity. I'm going to go try something new. I'm going to push for something that's, not on the agenda for today, and see how that goes. And I think like that kind of openness, that kind of freedom to experiment, to, learn from winning or failing, was really a large part of the accelerator for our growth in the long term.
So you've sold to the company, you've got team buy-in, you've got a CEO that buys in personally and wants to invest his own time. And it leads me to kind of my next question, right? I looked at some of your history there, and you made a specific change within the customer success team. Do you want to talk about that and how that impacted further growth?
Yeah, we did. And so, companies change structures, people come and go. We had a very dynamic, strong customer success leader that had recruited me in, that brought me in. And she left, about a year into it. And so that sort of put us, our mission, our place in the company sort of in question, like, where do we belong? And there was a few reorgs during that time, but I ended up working directly for a brand new chief product officer at that time. Mm-hmm. And I think initially we lost velocity, right? This new CPO comes in, really focused on building great product and engineering teams and doing all of this. Now he's got like this other team that also just got given to him. He's like, it seems like you guys know what you're doing, just going to leave it alone for a while. But, we needed that continuous support and buy-in to keep that going. And so I would say in the beginning, there was some detrimental impact to it, and that we lost maybe a good 6 months. I had to reestablish rapport with the new executive, get some of that going. But I think it also gave us a chance to ask ourselves, like, who are we? What do we want to do in this new world and with this new focus, like being closer to the product? What's the opportunity there that maybe we didn't have before? How can we bring that voice of the customer even directly into the product, right? Like, now that we're a part of the product team, how can we use that to our advantage? Because now there's not this barrier. Now there's not a series of people that I have to convince about something. Like, I've got a direct line to the leader of this organization. I'm aligned with the product managers. And so it took us a while to pivot, but I think it just opened a door. This setup doesn't exist in any other company I've ever worked at. I call it a happy accident, just in that perspective, and that it was a little frustrating to start with, but the net impact of that long term was it put the voice of the customer right in the middle of the product, right? Nice. So we were at the same table with everybody else that was talking about it. We were bringing the customer and those value propositions or those value gaps to the table. And I think one of the things that we did initially was, after that move, we did an entire customer journey exercise. We pulled together all the leaders from all the different departments and said, hey, let's get together. And from start to finish, from the time someone first learns about us online to the time that they leave us as a customer, what is every step in that journey? What are the friction points? What are the opportunities? And let's all level set. Like, let's all just say what has to be said about what's great and what's horrible, and really put it on the table, and then divide and conquer with, like, what are we going to do now that we are all aligned? Okay. And so it was I just call it like hitting the reset button, right? Like, we admit we've done a lot of things. People were thankful that we were able to accomplish them, but it was a new game now. And so the question was, how are we going to use that opportunity to make the product better, to keep the product-led growth train going, and then to continue to add value to our customers.
Wow, like that's like some big moves going like backwards and forwards, right? So that's a 3-year journey for Jungle Scout. Like the big question, I suppose, is, well, there's two. I think the first one is, how did PLG affect the bottom line? And you go on, and I'll ask.
No, I mean, I think it's a great question. There was a lot of fear for fully embracing PLG, right? We have a very strong funnel. Jungle Scout's always been a profitable company, so it wasn't like there was a need to make really large bets at the front end, because we'd always been successful, right? And so I think there's always like some challenges if I say, well, hey, let's try a freemium version or something, or let's do a free trial, or let's even do a credit card version of a free trial if we or 14 days, whatever it is, right? I think anytime you're going to change the core way that people come into the business, and that has been attributed to our growth vector, like you're calling, it's very sacred in some ways, right? And I think often that's not even just like a leadership decision. That often is something you'll even take to the board or to other people, right? And there's a lot of different stakeholders, and I think you get a lot of like fear and uncertainty, and so you have to come with the data, right? And it can't just be subjective. And so the way that we approach some of our product-led initiatives in terms of anything that might have a net impact on our finances was to test. And so, not do the whole funnel, but let's carve out 10%, and let's put that against the rest, and let's let this run for a while, right? So I think you have to, I hate to say it because it doesn't always work, but you have to incrementally go through some of the bigger things that you want to change, because there are some things you can't incrementalize your way to, but this is one of those things where I don't think you're going to get someone just say, oh, here, to put the whole business in your hands, and
just do it, right?
Right. So I think like really being aware of what is going to change hearts and minds, what is going to be the kind of proof that's needed. And I think like maybe the unfortunate part is, for a lot of these things, it does take some time. Like maybe you're looking at a quarter to really start to see results, because your business model is centered around, there's still a lot of marketing around your current business model, right? So it does take some time to build up that critical mass of data, to prove that the product is what's driving the growth, and not a cheap price or something like that, right? Not a deal that you're running.
Can I jump in, because you've mentioned the word pricing a couple of times now, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, as I said to you before we started the call, I was doing a go-to-market strategy presentation earlier, and pricing was key. And I haven't even asked you the pricing question, right? You just touched on models there. Like, how many different models did you look at before you settled on your pricing model?
I mean, a lot. And I would say like this was, maybe over a year that there was both research, active and passive. I'm sure we hired some people along the way. We got, outside advisors, internal advisors, people were bringing webinar, things to the table. We had some vendors that we were working with that had different programs that we looked at, right? Just in terms of like analyzing, we clearly did like different kinds of sentiment research on like, what would you be willing to pay? And, things like that. So I think it isn't a bad idea, but I often find that you can very easily get into like analysis paralysis, where there's just never going to be the perfect answer. Like no one's ever going to say, I 100% assure you that going with this model in this way, because I mean, let's just be real, like buying something, like think about your own experience of going to buy any product, any service, anything. There's so much nuance in what goes into your decision, even down to like how the pricing page is laid out, or what benefits are included or excluded, or, does Netflix have commercials or not, right? It's like, it's just like so many things. And I think in a subscription-based business specifically, you have to realize that this isn't a binary decision for people anymore, where it's just like, oh, I'm choosing between you and your competitor. People are taking every subscription that they own into consideration and saying, this isn't about just filling this gap in a need that I have. It's, I've got 100 subscriptions and maybe I have to lose 5 to take this one, or, whatever it is. And I think that's true not only of individual consumers, but even, all the way up to very large enterprises. People have budgets, people are money conscious. People are also very value sensitive, right? And for me, I am a constant market maven out there looking for new products, always trying the next big thing. I always have the newest iPhone, whatever it is, right? But I'm also the first person to drop something immediately if I don't get value from it right away. I'm willing to try anything, but I'm going to give it 1-2 logins. And if I haven't had that magic moment with it, I'm out and I'm never coming back again.
So you've got no zombie subscriptions in your personal life?
No zombie subscriptions. But, I think people have become much more ruthless about just how they spend their money and what they expect. I think expectations are very high. And I think a lot of the products we use day to day, like our phone, have great user experiences, constantly bringing value right into my hands. I want it now. I want news. I want updates. I want, so for software vendors, if you're not able to articulate your value proposition and deliver in a very compressed time frame, you have a handful of logins of people's attention to do something for them, to show them what you've got. And if you can't deliver, they're gone. And that word of mouth beyond that may also impact. Oh, I tried that, it was horrible. So there's both just that add-on effect to not bringing value, because you may never get a second chance. And so, in general, I always love to overpromise and underpromise and overdeliver. But that's hard now in software. And I think people do have a lot of choices, right? And then they vote with their money on, where the value is.
So there's a good point to touch on, right? I'm not going to name the platform, but I was kind of messing around with a LinkedIn automation platform, and I started to kind of see how whilst there is a value to being able to communicate to en masse to LinkedIn, it actually never works, right? It's not that it doesn't work and you can't generate conversations, but you just can't personalize enough in a constructive way. And so, I've done what a lot of people have done. I've got a little emoticon in my name now, and I can see when all of the automated responses are coming in. Yeah, exactly, right? So I just disregard them. But what I noticed was, I kind of said, look, I want out. I said, this is a zombie license. I've not used it for months, and I'm no longer going to waste the money, right? They kind of just came back and just offered me a discount. And I felt like, but I've just told you I'm not using it. You haven't kind of put me into this role or this nurturing process of, look, get back to this. Let's encourage you to use it. Here's another onboard. And it was just, let me offer you a discount and see if you stay. And what are your thoughts on businesses that do that with a product they approach? Yeah.
I think if someone's churned, it's too late, right? And not to say that they'll never come back. We actually have a fair share in our consumer business of people who do cycle in and out of our product because they don't always need it, but when they do, they know where they're going to go, right? And so that's just maybe in this specific instance, we've got a unique demographic there that's part of the business, but it's not the majority. But to your question specifically, I think there is a big opportunity to make sure that you are aligned. One of the first things we ask when you get into our product is what are you here to do? Why did you buy the product? So that we can direct them to those things, so we can make sure that they know what their happy path is. Because there's lots of things that you can do with our product, right? But why did you buy? Why did you come here today? What are you looking to do? And I think if you're not doing that from day one, at least capturing that information and maybe doing marketing, reinforcing marketing with that customer in the early stages. So, we have onboarding flows of emails that not just the in-app experience, but that are saying, hey, by this point, other customers have gotten to hear, and this is what they've learned, and these are the wins that they've had, or these are things that if you haven't tried it yet, you should jump in. Or based on what you told us is important, here are things that other people are doing too that have been successful, right? So you have to kind of continue to reinforce value both actively and passively. So in the tool, if you have the opportunity to do that, outside the tool, I get 100 emails, I'm probably not going to read everything, but I know someone's trying to reach out to me. I know they're trying to speak to my what I care about specifically, like that's going to go a lot further. And I think in the instance that you mentioned, a platform's telling you like, hey, I mean, I'll be honest, when we were creating our churn funnel, I looked at Hulu. If you say I cancel Hulu comes right back and says, how about a month free on us? And I'm like, all right, like who's going to say no to free? But they're also assuming that they're solving my problem by giving me, if I said it was expensive, sure, come at me with a deal. But if I say I'm not using it, I think it's almost insulting to say, oh, here's 50% off. Well, it wasn't a price thing. It was like, I'm not getting what I need from your product. So bridge that gap for me, and take that into account. So we have both like an input funnel and an output funnel. So people are leaving our product. We're capturing why. We're understanding. We're using that sentiment in a meaningful way to work that back into how do we make the product better. The truth is, like, we can't make it the best for everybody, right? We're never going to solve everybody's problems, but it's that whole 80-20 rule. Like, if we hear the same thing a lot, okay, price is too high. Oh, how do we address that for those people? Or, I don't have XYZ. Well, are those on our roadmap? Do they need to be? Just asking those questions and keeping that flywheel going, because I think you're missing out on an opportunity if they didn't know why you're quitting, and if they did, they're still not hitting the mark, right?
So let me ask you another question, because there's something that sits in between all of that, right? And this is a Jungle Scout question for you, right? So I'm specifically asking, how long do you let an account go latent before you guys try to intervene and reactivate it?
I mean, on the enterprise side, because we have like dedicated customer success managers, like not long. I would say like a week. A week is like max. And we even have some automated mechanisms, right? But I mean, we're saying if someone's not logging into the tool, they're not gonna see some of that. But someone will be reaching out like from my enterprise team like right away. If you're, and it may just be like, oh, I was on vacation, whatever. But I think you need to also understand like sometimes not using a tool is actually a positive thing. Like if it's an automation tool and I don't have to get in to change the automation, I win, right? Like you've saved me time, you saved me effort. So I think you do need to understand, does being in your tool more mean that someone's losing value? That's where you have to understand. So, we've got different products. Like we've got one that will like run advertising campaigns for you as an example. Well, the goal is like you go in and set it up and there's some refinement period. But after that, you shouldn't have to touch it too often. And so in that case, like I would expect usage, if they're using that product, to actually go down over time. That's a measure of success. But in some of our other products, like that's telling me they're going to churn, right? Telling me that they're not using it enough or they need more training. And so that's really the approach we'll take in general is, do you need more onboarding? Do you need more training? Is there some sort of issue that you haven't reported that we can help you with? But really trying to understand, like, is there a reason the rubber isn't meeting the road for you, and how do we close those gaps?
Wow, I think there's just so many golden nuggets in the information that you've shared with us so far. But I'm also time conscious, because I know that people get a little bit restless at about 45 minutes, and I had a couple of questions that I really wanted to get into that are geared up from a founder's perspective, and so I'm just going to whiz through them. Feel free to answer them in your own time, but I'll just kind of get through them. So how would you advise a company to approach assessing if their platform is right for product led? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think, what the advice that I give just to anybody that asks me about product led growth is, there is no one size fits all for product led growth. Product led growth is a strategy. You can think of it as a methodology or strategy or a series of rubrics or rules that you can apply. But I don't think, if you get too cultish about it and say like, oh, I have to have a free trial, I can't have a sales team, I can't, I disagree with all of that wholeheartedly. Like there are so many valuable things in product-led growth that are just, even if you don't fully adopt it, but if you do some of those things, like knowing the value of your product, reducing friction, closing value gaps, having great onboarding, doing customer research, doing experiment, like there's just so many things that I could just rattle off. Even if you don't fully adopt product-led growth, but you're doing those things, you're probably in a way better place with your business than you were before. So I would have to say, like, product-led growth is not one size fits all. There are so many aspects, and it's a spectrum, right? So some people might be able to get rid of their sales team entirely. I don't think like that's ever going to be an option like for our enterprise business, right? It's just like not going to happen. We're gonna have some product-led offerings, but it just doesn't work for everything. And I think you need to look at complexity as a vector there. Like a sufficiently complex product may not only need a sales team, but a services team and other things, right? So really understanding like what does it take to get your customers to where they need to be, and being honest about that, I think is really critical. There is a lot of businesses out there that I think over-index on having to charge for it, and especially at an early stage, because getting money for your product is a sign of success, right? If I just have a free trial and no one ever pays me for my product, well, what that tells me is that maybe there's not enough value in your product, right? And you need to do more research about where does that lie, or what is the business problem for your customer that people are willing to pay for? Like, what's the gap there? So really starting to take it piece by piece and assess how can you bring any part of product-led growth's strategy to play, and even just starting with little parts, I think is making a big difference in most businesses. Okay,
so that's a really good answer. But obviously, I've had the privilege to see your deck, and I know we didn't bring the deck into the chat this evening because we wanted to do a little bit more of this. But within the deck, you start off with values and charting a path. So how does that sort of overlay what you've just told us?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that I had put in there were, some of the things that I know helped us get started with this, and some of it is like things that I said before, like mapping your baseline, like really understanding where you're at today in your business. Identifying those jobs to be done, like hypercritical. Like if you don't know what your customers are doing in your product, that needs to be the first thing that you're doing right away after you know where you're at today. I think aligning internally on what are the business problems where you have leverage, where you have the ability to make a difference for your business, for your leadership, for your customers, to the bottom line. Like there are massive points of leverage. My problem when I started is I tried to ask a bunch of things where I didn't have any leverage. I didn't manage those teams. I didn't have the resources I need. I was being too ambitious, right? So understanding like where you physically can make a difference with your time, with your efforts, that's super big. And then using those as opportunities to get quick wins. So, hey, I'm going to work on this help project, and look, we reduce help, tickets by 50%. Like that's a quick win. And then how do we keep building on top of that? Like, okay, you gave me the opportunity to do this. I'm going to go off and do something else now that's going to prove that, building that velocity over time, and then using that credit that you've built up internally to gain buy-in for larger and larger, bets or projects that you want to run. But I think a lot of this is gaining that confidence from your teams and from your customers, frankly. Okay,
cool. And you're talking about data, right? Because everything is measure, test, extrapolate, and again and again and again. So if you're looking at data, if you were a company, you're talking to someone like me, I've got my own SaaS platform. I'm like, Danny, I'm following you on LinkedIn. You're doing all this good stuff. What should I be tracking at this moment in time? Because we're thinking about product-led. And what right now in my sales-led model should I be sort of focused on so I can scale that through?
Yeah, I mean, I think really like being able to understand what your customers are going through today. So from that first touch point that they have with any of your teams to the end of their first visit in the product, like at a minimum, you need to know that inside and out. Like you need to been able to watch it, to experience it, to hear it from them, to see it in the data. Like what path are they taking? What are they clicking on? Just every little bit at a very granular level. And then to be able to take a step back from that and say, here's what this looks like right now. How can we make this better? Both from our side, from just like smoothing out the information flow or making it more apparent about certain things, to the customer angle of like, are we taking too long selling it to them? Are there things that they could be doing themselves in the process that we don't have to be doing? Are they within those first one or two visits getting what they came here to get, right? Is there some sort of critical job to be done that has to be done during that first or second visit that isn't happening? And those are the kinds of things that I would start with from a measurement perspective. And if you see gaps there right away, those are your top projects, right? Because you don't have a rest of the funnel if that part isn't solid.
Okay. So I'm going to wrap up with like one final question, because I think the question really is in two parts. So the first thing is, how does PLG impact the go-to-market strategy in its entirety? And tell me whatever else I didn't ask you that you feel the audience should hear. So there's two parts to that one question.
Yeah, I think, in some ways, just from a definition standpoint, like product-led growth is a go-to-market strategy, right? Again, not being too cultish about it, like really taking a step back from that, is I would say it's a series of best practices is really what it is, right? And so, for me, thinking about how can I go to market by integrating more and more of these best practices into what I'm doing on a daily basis. And whether that's, customer research, whether that's, value-based marketing, product-led, if you can have a free trial, if you can let people into your product to have some sort of experience and get that value directly from the product. But, even if you can't do that, if you're doing demos of your product, like if people are realizing that they want to buy it from that demo, like that is still product-led. Like I'm going to like go that far to say, like, if you can show value in a very short period of time with your product, that is being product-led too. And so I think a lot of this is really just like, it's not so much about like changing everything you're doing. A lot of it is changing how you think about it, right? Yeah. And I forget who said it, but someone said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And it sounds like a very simple sort of rubric, right? But at the end of the day, like, looking at things more often through that product-led lens, looking at it through how your customer experience is being impacted by those things. I think it becomes very clear to you where the opportunities exist in your day-to-day go-to-market strategy, in that big picture view of like how you want to connect with your customers and why you're the best choice of everybody else. Like it just becomes so much more transparent, I feel, externally, where there's not this like, oh, we got to keep the product secret because if they see it all, they may not buy it. Like that's the old days, right? Like we've got to remove our blinders and really step into the future of, you have to lead with your product. Your product has to bring value to the table. And if not, there's no amount of creative marketing that's going to change that, right? You can tell people something, but selling them the dream and them living the dream are two different things.
And that's kind of the crux of sales, right? Is that people are feeling that way. They're feeling like you sell the dream and you don't deliver. And whether that's support or whatever.
And I think that is a lot of the problem. And I think like making sales be more focused on the product and not overselling or not selling the product I have next year, which look, great salespeople do that. They are great, but I just don't think you're going to get the same kind of reception today that you may have got 5 years ago from selling the dream. Right. And I think many people, like, they're staking their business. This is an investment for them in a lot of cases, and especially when you go up market, right? If I'm selling to a Fortune 500 company and they're spending a lot of money with me, I have to deliver immediately on that dream. And I don't have a lot of wiggle room, right? And I don't think we should discount regular consumers either. I think they're in a similar position too. Choice is probably more ubiquitous than it's ever been. And so, again, to that big picture question you asked me, like, what would I advise people to do? Like, don't wait. Don't sit around reading books. Don't just go to a bunch of webinars. Like, don't expect to like learn your way out of this. Like, start trying things. Like, start taking one small piece and saying, can we iterate on this? Can we iterate on our funnel? Can we iterate on a free trial? Can we iterate on a pricing model, on onboarding, on training, on help, on, on an exit flow for our product? If we're losing a lot of people, like maybe that's more important, right? But I would say, like, don't wait to start doing something because you feel like you don't understand it all. Like, pick something, dive deep, learn as much as you can, and then just keep iterating, because this is not like a one and done thing. It's never going to be. And I think that's the other maybe misconception that a lot of people have about product-led growth is like, oh, I do this and then it's over. Like this is a process. It's an ongoing, living, breathing thing, just like your product is. And so it takes water and feeding. It takes maintenance. It takes investment too. So I think that's the main message I would say, just from an overarching, like, start today. There's lots of great resources out there, and use that to your advantage, because I think there's a lot of great thinking going on in this space right now.
Oh, Danny, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. We hit the magic hour. I kept it under. I'm really proud of myself for doing that. Once again, I'll follow up outside of this, but I appreciate your time. All of that magic that you've just shared, I'm sure people will make a lot of use of. I'm going to reshare this live in UK daytime, so when most people are not at home eating a dinner. But I appreciate you coming on, and thanks once again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Paul.